So we stayed behind in the studio to answer a few of the questions that we couldn't get to. Thanks very much for coming back to get the answers to your burning questions. One of the questions we do want to address is probably something that many of you might be feeling or thinking around ISBs taking on funding or responsibilities for collecting levies, and then what might then happen with that. Yeah. Few of us have experienced industry training of the past, and perhaps that model wasn't necessarily the best approach. The current system is simple to administer and understand by providers. That's a good question. What evidence do you have that giving TEC and ISBs more discretion about how funding is dispersed will be more workable or feasible given their current and likely capabilities? Do you have any thoughts or comments that you'd like to make on the allergic reaction that some people might be having out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think let's first acknowledge, and I think we've done that in the papers and the conversation, that the current system's simple, simple to administer, simple to understand. And part of the reason, that we haven't tried to stretch what we do with investment is because it's actually hard and challenging. There's no question about that. The issues that we've had in the past, we would hope not to replicate with industry skills boards because they'll inevitably have to take a broader focus. They'll be sector-based rather than particularly industry-based. We've offered, I think, a real prescription for the kinds of things that the funding can be used for. You wouldn't want to constrain particularly freedom of movement for people, but having some sort of set of guiding principles to help make those decisions, I think, is really important. It's really clear ministers are starting to think in this way. So, we know about the $20 million that's been ring-fenced for strategic investment. The bit that's concerning about that, I think, is comments that were made at Select Committee that it'll be allocated formulaically. Those sorts of approaches are fine, and if you want a simple to administer system, but actually I think we can do better as a country. We know a lot more about what the outcomes are, what the effects can be, and we really should make an effort to look at doing things differently, even if we explore this on a pilot basis. When we're proposing that all $3 billion of tertiary education funding get administered in this way. Perhaps we start slowly, see what works, test, refine. It's good practice and something we could employ.
And I think the construction and infrastructure sectors might be up for that too. Yeah. Okay. Right. We are going to move on to a couple more questions. We're going to move on now. I think this was Josh's question. Roger mentioned the work-based and provider-based parts of the system. What's your take on the history of treating and resourcing those separately? And do you see any or all of your 5 proposals improving collaboration between employers and educators?
Right. I think that's a really important question. The issue about when I talked about the work-based component and the provider-based being as if they're separate, it's because that's the tradition that we come from. That's how it's always been seen, it's how it's always been treated, and how it's always been resourced. We very much hope that our proposals will blur those distinctions, particularly in the context of some of the changes that the government has signalled. One of the hopes of the ROVE system was that there would be a much more seamless connection between those two different parts. I think that there is the potential for that to happen now as the new system evolves. One of the things I think that's really important is that as we developed our proposals, we were looking at the two components as being part of an integrated whole. The vocational education has to have both a practical work-based component and a theoretical, if you like, understanding of why one does things in a particular way. So the two things should be seamless. We would hope that as particularly if our recommendations were moved on, that would be a much greater, there would be a much greater connection. We think also that if we were to strengthen the learner support for people on job, the training advice function, that would help build the collaboration between the provider that will be responsible for that piece of, for the arranging of the training, and the employer. Currently, our interviews suggested that there were, in many cases, overstretched training advisors were more or less neglecting to really communicate well with the employer, so that you actually, the current stretch system almost reinforced the difference between the separation of the employer and the training. We hope that with a stronger training advice function, that would see a much greater level of collaboration, cooperation, and communication between all the parts of the system.
Great. Thanks, Roger. We're going to go to Brendan for this one. The question is, the proposal assumes devolving decision-making will significantly improve responsiveness to local needs. But what evidence do you have that regional bodies, iwi groups, and local industry representatives possess the capability, expertise, or governance structures required to effectively manage these responsibilities without creating new layers of bureaucracy and inefficiency, or many different systems in all parts of the country?
Yeah, sure. There obviously needs to be a degree of flexibility and tailoring to individual and local circumstances and regions. We think that there's ways that you can achieve those goals without creating undue layers of bureaucracy. So, models, I think, as we alluded to, like the city and regions deals, there's already considerable capability in a number of our iwi organisations that mean actually they can bring some very serious consideration, analytical expertise and resource to bear on dealing with these sorts of issues. Part of the reason that we don't have the capability evident to make devolved decision-making more broadly is that we don't do it. New Zealand's, one of the most centralised, political systems in the world. Even the current city and regional deals as they're envisaged don't really transfer power, responsibility, decisions to make authority to make decisions about funding to regions. It's a learnt, trained behaviour. And where we've had instruments like the advice that workforce development councils give to the TEC about funding, that has been entirely neutered. It's really become an exercise in talking about individual programs rather than thinking about an ecosystem or a network of provision, which is where the real value that groups like this, both at a region and at a national level, can provide.
Anything to add to that, Roger?
I think it's going to be an evolution. If we were to go this way, then we would need to that capability would arise, be developed, be nurtured as the system unfolded. You can't go from 0 to 100 in overnight. You have to work into it, but the capability, I would have thought, and the expertise will evolve as the system is unrolled.
Great. Thank you both. So we're coming to our last question, and before I ask the question, I'm going to ask you again to please give your feedback by the 27th of June. It's a very simple and easy process and shouldn't be too time-consuming for you, but we do need your thoughts to help shape the final version of this paper. Thanks very much. Now, our final question. The argument for multi-year strategic investment assumes vocational providers will effectively utilise stable funding to innovate and improve outcomes. However, historically, providers have faced significant management and quality challenges, even when funding was predictable. What specific safeguards or accountability measures are proposed or should be proposed to ensure stable funding leads to better educational and employment outcomes rather than just simply entrenching existing inefficiencies?
Okay, well, I'll start with this, but Brenda will have a contribution as well. The first thing is, one of the things that we said is that this multi-year guaranteed funding will be for providers that are high performing and in other words, that have delivered on good outcomes in the past and have a track record. So it doesn't go to everybody. What it phases in initially to providers who have proven capability on delivering not just a certain number of enrolments each year, but who have a track record in delivering good outcomes. So in other words, what we're saying is, if you do have good outcomes, then here is a fund which will enable you to build on what you are doing and what you have done. There will still have to be accountability, but the accountability measures would have to be designed around ensuring that we look at what the provider delivers, what the value of that is. In other words, what value is that provider delivering to the system and to the learners going through that provider. So in terms of specific safeguards, in terms of specific accountability measures, well, I think that's a level of detail that that will come further down the track. But the key point is that this is about rewarding high-performing providers and freeing them to do what they do well.
So before we go to Brendan, just a clarification question.
Yeah.
By providers, are you including those who deliver work-based learning
Yes.
or support work-based learning?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Which would create quite an potentially interesting conundrum for some of them. Brendan.
I think the only other observation I'd make is perhaps to take issue with the premise in the question. I don't think in living memory we can point to a time when funding was ever predictable. That a lot of the claimed concerns about management and quality are a reflection of ex post judgments about how organisations have responded to the reality of the incentives before them. I think we've probably seen 5 or 6 times where government has tried to step in and fix systems, and they've done that in a way that is continually reducing institutional autonomy and flexibility to respond. They're continually constraining what institutions can do and how they do it. And actually, I think what we're calling for is a high degree of trust, for those high-performing institutions. Let's start there and really start to build a system that is truly trust-based, that focuses on outcomes. And we think there's a lot of positive opportunity sitting there.
Wonderful. Thank you both. And before we wrap up, any final thoughts? Anything that you just want to leave on the table?
Well, I think it's important that we get good feedback through the survey, through the submissions that people make, in order that we finalise the report, finalise our recommendations, modify them, tweak them, make sure that they're robust. It's not the sort of thing where two people hold all the wisdom. We really want to moderate, if you like, our views in light of what the people listening today, who in most cases have years of experience, expertise, and insight, we need those insights to help us finish.
Great, thanks, Roger. And
Thanks.
Brendan?
Yeah, and I think both to tautoko what Roger said, but also I think just to acknowledge that change isn't a passive process. And so, many of you are using opportunities you have to lobby, to influence, where you agree with what we've proposed, where you don't agree. We encourage you to engage with those processes, make submissions, talk to political and policy leaders and try and shift the system into a different setting, a different frame of mind. And we think that the 5 changes we're proposing are a good step in that direction. So, thank you.
Great. Wonderful. Again, thank you both so much for your time and for being in Tamaki Makaurau with me today to do this live. We do really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And ngā mihi nui to all of you who came along and watched today and who are watching the playback. Thanks so much, and remember to get your submissions in.